Hey, discern listeners, this is Chapter 3 in our deep dive on the psychology of Elon Musk. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I train circus termites.
So let's start where we left off. Here's the part of my outline where I mentioned that Elon Musk was severely abused by his father. There will be later chapters where we will talk about that at length as it relates to Elon Musk's development and his psychology. Now let's talk about how he didn't have very many friends. He had trouble making friends as a child. In Ashley Vance's biography, she interviewed Elon and his family members, and she wrote, Elon's constant yearning to correct people and his abrasive manner put off other kids and added to his feelings of isolation. Elon genuinely thought that people would be happy to hear about the flaws in their thinking. Ashley Vance went on to write that his mom would try to help Elon by telling him that other kids don't like to play that way, but Elon still struggled in socializing and making friends. She also wrote that his brother and sister would bring home friends while Elon never did. His mother would ask his siblings, his younger siblings, by the way, to include Elon when the friends would come over. But his two younger siblings would say, but Mom, he's not fun. So any thoughts on this, Berto?
That's hard. Well, so first of all, it's not unusual for siblings to not want to include other siblings with their friends. I can relate.
But usually that's the other direction where your parents are saying include your younger sibling.
Yeah. Not
to a younger sibling, include the older sibling.
Yeah, that's totally true. Yeah. It is usually the other direction. If they were moving constantly and if he was constantly trying to poke holes at everyone's thoughts and feelings, then it probably makes sense that it was hard for him to maintain constant friendships.
Right. I think that's the relevant detail to me, is that in all of her interviewing and talking to Elon and mom and siblings, Ashley Vance says that Elon was constantly yearning to correct people and that he was doing so in a quote-unquote abrasive manner, and that Elon genuinely thought that people wanted to hear about how their thinking was wrong. So that says something, but more on that later. Now, the question is, why did he not have friends growing up? And this is relevant later when we get into the bullying. That's a much later chapter, and also like his behavior on Twitter. I think all that is related. I think that if he had friends growing up, his behavior on Twitter would be very different. He might not even be using Twitter if he had friends. I can't know that, of course. That's very reductive and simplistic, but I think there are some threads there. So we can ask, though, and people do, why did he not have friends? What do you think the dominant answer is to that question?
Oh, that he is autistic, or that he is too weird in his way of interacting with people.
Okay, yeah. Some say that it's because Elon is autistic. He has stated that, he revealed that when he was on SNL during his monologue, that he is autistic. So, of course, one of the central features of autism is being socially awkward. Not all people with autism are socially awkward, but it is a common enough feature. And in all of my research, there's not a lot of data along these lines, but there is some support for the hypothesis that because he was autistic, that made it hard for him to make friends, that was at least a factor, if not the major factor. There is limited data, but there's enough there that points to a pattern of him in his early childhood that many people with autism will attest to, that he was very focused on particular interests and that he had difficulty understanding social situations such that he would be able to navigate and be charming or pleasing or fit in. When we consider what Ashley Vance said about his childhood after interviewing the family, you can imagine a very young Elon Musk not knowing, and no one knowing, that he is autistic. You know, all kids want to be smart, right?
Right.
And all kids want to say, you're wrong, I'm right. Okay, everyone is like that. Just look at the internet, right? Not just kids, but adults. When it comes to people on the autism spectrum, they might have a difficulty managing that impulse and noticing that when they experiment with that impulse, that they don't get the satisfaction or their goal isn't met. There's a lot of goals when kids are playing with other kids. They want to be smart, they want to have self-esteem, but they also want to get along, they want to be pleasing, they want the friend to hang out with them later. And so if you're hyper-focused on particular things, you might legitimately know more than other kids do about things. But you also have the normal impulse to just show off and say, I know things and I know that you're wrong. But if you're not picking up on the feedback, the frown or the turn away or the fact that the kid is edging away from you at the playground, you don't notice that, you don't interpret it well enough, then you won't pull back on that activity, and that can lead to a feedback loop for some kids that I've seen where as people are pulling away from you, you feel less secure and you feel rejection, and it's subtle, right? And when you're 5 years old, you don't really have the differentiation to reflect. You're feeling this subconsciously to a large extent. And so you might kind of double down on your strengths, which is things and other people are wrong. And you could see how this would cascade.
Right.
And then by the time you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you have self-identified as someone that doesn't get along with other people, and your peer group has also identified you as a weirdo. So even if you have the opportunity to practice socializing, you're at such a disadvantage that the future is sort of set in a way. You have so much catch up to do that it makes it so that it's just a repeating pattern of you leaning into your strengths, you not understanding how to interpret other people's social subtle cues, other people labeling you and steering clear of you, like what the brother and sister said was, he's no fun.
Yeah.
We've already been down this road. We've involved him with our friend group. He drags us down, or he bothers other people, or whatever it was, So I think that autism is definitely a viable factor. What a lot of people say, though, is that he was just too smart for his friends, too smart for his peers. The way that the Joe Rogans will talk about him, he is a super genius. He has a superpower. He's almost a god among men, similar to the way Jesus is written about in the Bible. What's that story? Like he goes to the synagogue or to the church or to the religious leaders, and at a very young age, Jesus is able to have very lengthy conversations about religion and God.
Torah
and that
at length.
Yeah. And so it's that kind of messianic point of view about Elon Musk, which a lot of people have, whether they are explicit about it or not. It's sort of a romantic notion that geniuses were always geniuses. They were meant to be geniuses, and there was no stopping them. And when they were kids, it's just hard to imagine a little Elon Musk being a kid, because we just know him as an adult. But of course, when he was young, he would have just been a pretty typical kid, maybe autistic. But anyway, so a lot of people will say that he was just too smart for people. He's too smart for us now. That's why he's just so beyond, and that's why no one understands him. And I'll say that it's possible that being intelligent was a factor, but according to research, being smart or creative is not associated strongly with not having any friends. Yeah. We established earlier that you have similar strengths and qualities as Elon Musk. I've tested your IQ. You are in the genius, you're at the 98, 99 percentile, and yet you had friends. Yeah. So it's a bit of a silly trope in movies and TV shows that smart kids by definition won't have friends. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that there's many people that we know are as famous actors or influencers that are actually very, very smart, and they're perfectly sociable. In fact, they're hyper social. They're very good at influencing others and whatnot. Yeah, it's different personalities that are coupled with levels of intelligence. But look, I also know people that are very antisocial, meaning not good with people, that are not very smart.
You mean asocial?
Asocial, that are not very smart.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's not a huge correlation there. So I would add another factor in that he was abused by his father, possibly the main victim. I didn't hear that explicitly, but there are signs. And what abuse will do to you is it will cause you to feel shame about your family, and you don't want to invite people over to your house. Also, it can affect your self-esteem. His dad was constantly calling him and making him feel like an idiot. He'd literally say, "You're an idiot," and would criticize and put down everyone around him, and including Elon. And you can imagine that would take a toll on your self-esteem, which would make it hard to function in social situations. And again, you might lead into the things that you know about. And if you're in a constant state of low self-esteem, what do insecure people do? Well, they unfortunately tend to put other people down as a way of getting some semblance of self-esteem through comparison. And I didn't hear any direct evidence of that, but we hear when he was very young that he was abrasively telling other people that they're wrong. The romantic version of that story is that he was such a genius he couldn't help himself. The unromantic one is that his dad was constantly calling him a fucking idiot. And so what do kids do but absorb their parents' behavior and repeat it on the playground?
Yeah, totally. One question I have is, has he himself stated, what is his opinion about whether he had or didn't have friends? Does he say I didn't have friends?
Yeah, he says he didn't have friends, yeah.
Okay, so it's not just others remembering.
Oh, no, he's quite open about that, yeah. And I would even think he would say as an adult, he has trouble making friends, yeah. So another detail worth mentioning about his childhood is that he was routinely bullied by his peers. And people often talk about this one instance which landed him in the hospital, which we'll get into in a later chapter. But it's way more extensive than just that, which we'll get into later. And of course, that would have a pretty profound effect on you. And I, again, will relate this as a potential explanation for some of his behavior on Twitter, or even just his desire to buy Twitter. One of the things that people often say a lot about him as a child is that he read a lot. But first, let's take a break. What do you say, Berto?
Let's take a break.
All right, we're back from the break. So, as a child, he has talked about, and his mom has talked about, how he read a lot. And the way that it's often talked about is that this is another example of just how much of a genius he was and how different he was. Another way of looking at it is that it was a replacement for not having any friends. If you don't have any friends, you got to figure out something else you're going to do. Books were around, so I suppose you could have gotten into more self-destructive things, but the question is, if he did have friends, how much reading would he have done? Maybe some, but I'm guessing far less. I think this was his second choice for him. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But who knows? And you wonder, if he did have friends, would he have even been successful? It's an interesting question. And what he read was a lot of sci-fi. He read Isaac Asimov, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, stuff like this, stuff that you and I read back then as well. I can relate to this. I didn't need an escape, but I did love sci-fi. As a very young child, I read anything I could get my hands on that had to do with astronomy. In kindergarten, checked out a book from the library that was just called something like Space. I bought it, a version of it. It's on the bookshelf behind me. And I didn't really even understand what I was looking at, but I just knew I loved it. And I would later study astronomy and astrophysics and really loved it. And it's funny to read these books, because they're written in the 60s and the science was way different back then.
Sure.
So this is another area that we can speculate as to how this might have affected Elon's development and his psychology. So let me tell a story that could be Elon's story. I don't know. So you're being abused by your father severely. You're being rejected severely and bullied severely at school, beaten at times by your father and by kids at school, sometimes severely beaten. There's political strife all around you in your community. There's guerrilla warfare. There's violence, riots, murder. But the one place that you feel safe is reading sci-fi. And you're swept away by the stories. And the stories are about future technology, about traveling the stars. You imagine yourself flying away from Earth, away from the chaos and the messiness and the trauma and the danger and the threat of Earth, away from your abusive father, away from the bullies at school. You imagine yourself in the distant future somewhere where smart people and special people are appreciated. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
This is likely a huge factor in his personality development. What if there were no sci-fi books around? Or what if someone had given him books about plants or something, or dinosaurs, and he just fell in love with that? if he is autistic, he might have become very hyper-focused on sci-fi because maybe it spoke to him, but it also could have just been one of the things that was around. But you could imagine this being a very attractive world to live in. And we could imagine that this was foundational in his approach to life and in his focus and in his solution for safety. So as he goes into adulthood, as we've talked about before, it's a possibility similar to you that there's just the constant state of danger and threat that is around every corner. There's no way to soothe yourself. He's walking around with the threat of society that he absorbed as a child. He's walking around with the constant threat of his father, right, and that he isn't safe anywhere. He's not safe at home. He's not safe at school. He's not safe walking to school. He's not safe in the neighborhood, in the community. People are being harmed while they're going to the store. And there's only one place that's in his mind, flying to Mars. As an adult, and there's occasional threats and there's occasional danger and there's occasional criticism and what can feel abusive, people online or another business or an investor that is mean to him or is, pulling out of investor or whatever. You just feel these threats, these anxieties, and you're having trouble relating to other people with, your marriage isn't going that well. You can imagine in your head saying, there's always the future. There's always Mars. There's always Mars. If I can just get to Mars, if I can just get to space, and that's what I'm going to do in my head. That's what I'm going to think about. Yeah. My head hits the pillow, and that's where my brain goes. That's what feels safe to me. I just need to get there. And it's a desperation, right? A drive, not just an interest. And I'm just trying to think for myself, if I felt threatened by people online, my safe place is my wife. I would run to her and hug her and talk to her and cry or to ask for her support or something. That'd be one of the places that I would go because I had a different childhood. For him, it's Mars. It's space. It's not just, I need to write a book about, I need to physically get there. Yeah. He has talked about, he wants a colony there in his lifetime, which we'll get into later as the viability of that. But, I'm pretty sure he wants to be at least one of the way on, not the initial wave because he's not like an astronaut, but I imagine so I think this is a very real desperation and a very real attempt to get to safety. What do you think?
Yeah. It's a totally plausible hypothesis. I feel like his desire around, like, all the companies, not all, but most of the companies he's invested in have this connecting through line, which is that survival. It's about survival. And it's what I was saying in the first episode, which is, and I share this to a certain extent, which is the idea of everything is dangerous, everything's going to die, we're all doomed. So how do we survive? So many people might think of it like, okay, well, I should save some money, maybe put away for a little rainy day. No. You're talking about like the next few years. No, I'm talking about like in the long term. How do we survive? Well, we got to get out of this planet. and coupled with your ideas of this planet is really dangerous. Everything's dangerous. I got to get out. But then it's not good enough to just be like, okay, well, I'll build rockets, I guess. No, because the rockets, I have to be a human with my flesh and bone. No, we also need the robots and we need the AI and we need neural implants so I can transfer my consciousness to the AI because I need to live forever. That's safety. That's safety.
Yeah, and Isaac Asimov, Hitchhiker's Guide, they have computers and androids and those kinds of elements. So you just wonder, Now, he's not completely in fiction. He's grounded in reality, but you just wonder, because one of the things that I've learned is that when we see odd behavior, abusive behavior, or what people say crazy behavior on Twitter or something, problematic political takes, this kind of thing, we tend to think either they're crazy, like they're losing their mind, or they are racist and evil and psychopathic and they lack empathy. And those things are possible, but more often than not, in all of my work with humans, is that it's someone that feels unsafe and they're trying to get to safety. And this is how they interpret. Now, they probably aren't aware that they feel
Yeah.
unsafe. Most people aren't aware of any of their emotions, let alone that. But the motivation is, I am unsafe, and by doing this, I will get more safe.
Yeah.
Your worries about immigrants, which we'll get into later about him, even though he's literally an immigrant. But it doesn't take a genius to analyze the paranoia that people have around the world, not just the United States, about immigrants and the wall and the border and all this kind of stuff, is largely abstract and not practical and not based on data, yet it plays into just a human, maybe even we evolved this way as, we were walking around in packs of 100 people, because other primates will have territories, and the neighboring tribe or group, there's a border and there will be fighting, and you have to protect your area because of the resources and whatnot. And there's just this worry of, I need to be safe. I'm scared. And the answer to my safety is, I need to keep the immigrants out, or I need to get rid of the other political party, or I need to crush my opponents, or I need to make more money, or I need to get more investors, or I need to make another technology to get me off of this planet, get me out of even this body. It's a desperation. And on the surface, you won't necessarily see that, if this is true, which is purely speculative. You wouldn't see Elon Musk just in a constant state, of like he's a little chihuahua shaking all the time. He would just be calm and just acting the way that anyone would act in public. And he would go to bed at night and he would wake up. And, life is the same, but a constant, on a scale from 1 to 10, someone could be like at a 5 or a 6 or a 7 of terror the whole time. That's the thing about chronic terror, is that it becomes so normal to you that you don't signal it, you don't even notice it.
Yeah.
You ask them, are you scared? They'd be like, no. But they don't know what it's like. It's sort of like when water finally comes out of your ears.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I can hear?
This is what it was like.
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is a pretty compelling thing. You just think about that, because our personalities are formed when we're young.
Totally.
And he's being beaten at home. He's being beaten at school. He has no friends. And he finds sci-fi and Mars and space travel and androids and computers. It's a compelling argument for his drive, for better or for worse.
Totally. I buy it.
So let's take a break. The rest of this episode is just going to be for patrons of the podcast. We're going to continue our analysis here, and become a patron by clicking below. Otherwise, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.